Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 202 of the KISS Army Nation podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Pasquale Veri.
And I am Claudius Pera. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Tonight, we're lighting the fuse on a very special episode. We are joined by a true legend in live concert production, the man behind some of the most jaw-dropping explosions, fireballs, and effects that defined rock shows in the 70s, 80s, and beyond. KISS Army Nation, please welcome Pyro John Watkins. Welcome to the show, my friends.
Hello.
Hey, John. How are you?
Hello, KISS Army Nation.
How you doing? Thanks for being here with us. Thank you so much.
Whenever I fill out a job application, I used to always put under military service, officer in the KISS Army.
There you go.
That's good.
There you go.
John, we're going to get going. And, I like to use the term, spark. So what first sparked your interest in pyro and special effects? Was it the music, movies, or something completely different?
Well, I was raised in Houston, Texas, and we all played with cherry bombs and M80s and stuff as kids. That was just normal American fun. So I've always loved fireworks and blowing things up.
Okay. So did you have any kind of mentors or figures that who taught you the ropes, or you were just doing yourself, things? You were self-taught?
Well, I was self-taught, but I learned nothing. So
that's okay.
It wasn't until I actually got the job with KISS, I was hired by the master pyrotechnician, Hank Schmel, who was, talk about legend. That's a legend. He pretty much invented rock and roll pyro. So I started out as his third assistant, which meant I loaded fog machines, loaded confetti machines, and things like that, and worked my way up in the special effects ladder to learning pyrotechnics.
Okay. So that was the moment when you basically realized that you could actually make a career out of doing pyro? Was it that moment that basically from there you kind of started your whole career?
No, it wasn't there. I thought when the KISS tour ended, that would be my one big fantasy adventure. So it wasn't until I found out that I couldn't not do pyro for a living that I was going to do pyro for a living.
Okay. I love it.
So I want to go back to the early days when you mentioned you started with KISS. So you started doing pyro with KISS during the Dynasty tour in 1979. You sort of touched on this, but if you go into more details, how exactly did you get connected with KISS in the 70s?
My best friend was a kid named Tim Zock. And we met at church camp, which we went to for a week every summer. He's the one that introduced me to flash powder. We used to compete as to who could scare the priests the best. And he would rig the whole room with flash powder in the light sockets. So when the priest would turn on the light switch, the whole room would go boom, 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 boom. So he's the one that paved the way. We fell apart. Our paths went away. I went to college, and I didn't even know where he went. And then after I graduated, the year I graduated, me and another friend from church camp went to a Tubes concert in San Francisco. And there was Tim running around the backstage pass doing their special effects and their props and things like that. So, and he went from there to KISS. And then the day before he was supposed to leave for the Japan tour, he got killed.
Oh.
I think it's so cool that we are talking about the Dynasty tour in 79. That happened to be my first show here in Montreal. I was 10, 11 years old, and now we're talking to the guy that
you had the T-shirt on, right?
That's the guy. I'm the guy with the KISS T-shirt, and it's so cool. We're talking to the guy that did the pyro on my first KISS concert. That's insane. So for the people who weren't at the show, talk to us about some of the effects that you created during the Dynasty show.
Hank created the Dynasty show, and he taught me his tricks. Okay. So I can't take any credit for the only thing I designed during the Dynasty tour was Gene Simmons' blood.
Right.
So
what was it? It was too thin, and you made it thicker or something?
It was too sticky, and it didn't look right, and he hated it, and it didn't stick to the grease paint and things like that. So I came up with a flour-based soup base, colored red, that would stick to the grease paint, not to his hands. But it took weeks and lots of experiments.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what they did before the Dynasty show, before you showed them that. What were they using?
Regular corn syrup blood from Hollywood.
Okay. So I know during that tour that a lot of suggestions were made for not so safe effects. When it comes to mind is the Paul Stanley laser eye effect. Talk to us about that.
Well, the problem with the laser eye effect was it shot a laser out of his eye. And if you have to look down at your hands to know what your fingers are doing, that means the laser goes into the audience, which is bad.
Right.
Gene wanted to charge the kids for eye surgery, but that didn't fly.
And I remember, I don't know if you're privy to this. I think it was during the Dynasty show that they were talking about different effects for the characters, and the flying effect. Was it originally for Paul, or was that intended for Gene?
It was originally for Paul.
It was for Paul, eh? And Paul was afraid to do it or didn't want to do it. And Gene says, "Yep, I'll do it."
Yeah, and then talk about afraid. Gene hated it, but
right, he hates heights.
See, each one had their own effect. Peter was supposed to have laser drumsticks, and these things were so covered and big. It would be like Paul was supposed to have the laser eye and was shot into the audience. Gene flew, and Ace had his guitar was supposed to shoot lasers out the neck, but we wound up converting it to a rocket guitar.
So now that we're talking about, Paul and Gene, Ace and Peter, everybody knows that they have, some very polar opposites personalities, right? So what were the significant differences between Paul and Gene related to effects that they could have liked to see on stage? Did they ever come to you saying, I'd like to have this, I'd like to have that? So, and then maybe it was not technically possible, or so did you already see those big differences between Paul and Gene in the case of what they wanted to do on stage in terms of, effects?
Well, it's almost like those two never met. One would come up, I want more pyro. And one would come up, less smoke. So my shirts for that tour wound up having less smoke on one side and more pyro on the other. And I could point at whoever I was talking to.
Okay.
Reinforce the point.
So was there a moment, I guess there must have been many, but when a pyro effect went wrong or almost went wrong that you can remember?
The very first time I was ever allowed to wire the pyro, I did it wrong. And I plugged the ground, the common ground into the #1 channel, which meant everything on the stage went, because the ground became the hot, and it shot through everything. So they're doing King of the Nighttime World, and that thing went kaboom! Cymbals were going up. Gene's cape was flying forward.
Really? Wow.
It was embarrassing, but we were able to rewire it and reload it and refix it. And Hank stepped in front of me and Gene and said, "What do you mean? I thought you wanted it loud."
Yeah.
Were you guys trying things out before the shows, or at that time, there was no time, there was a show after show? Did you have time to kind of role play what you guys wanted to do in terms of effects?
Well, not once it was designed and on and rolling, but there was a lot with pyrotechnics. A lot of thought goes into it beforehand. Okay. So there was, I can't say how much time was spent experimenting and testing and stuff before we ever even came near rehearsals. And then we were in Long Island. First we were in Connecticut at some place, and then we went to Long Island, and that was all before we did the first show in Lakeland. So
you make a specific reference to that time when Ace got got his fingers burned, and because of touching the rail or something like that.
That was in '79, I think. Yeah. 77. Yeah. He grounded to a staircase rail. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Before my time. Didn't do it. Just like Michael Jackson. Didn't do it.
So, John, you mentioned the laser drumsticks, the lasers out of the guitar, lasers out of the eye. Pretty ambitious ideas for the late '70s. Do you think those ideas would have worked today with the technology we have today?
You missed the best one, the laser curtain. That was
Laser?
the laser curtain.
I never heard of that one.
That's what sold them on this laser company. They were going to have a laser curtain that went all the way around the stage when they made their appearance.
Okay.
Oh,
Good idea on paper. Unfortunately, for this to work, it had to have something like 700 mirrors, all perfectly focused around the truss. And then a beam behind Peter would shoot up and spin and hit all these meters and make this curtain. They spent, I don't know how many thousands of dollars. They're still in court over this, still.
Really?
But what happened was, first off, it was a brand new company. And I thank God for them every day, because as the brand new pyro guy, when you're new, you catch all hell. But if there's someone that sucks more than you suck, then you kind of get, a pass. These guys didn't even put wheels on their cases. There's these unpainted boxes with all this equipment in it. The first time they moved it, I think they broke half the mirrors. And when they finally got it up, the spinning thing went. So you see this one line running around the stage. And
Right.
Gene and Paul were just staring at this thing going,
what is that?
But they did that wall at the end of the end of the road. I know in New York, Paul's stage, when he flew to the stage, they had a laser wall around his mini stage, which looked really, really impressive.
40 years of maybe the
Yeah.
technology advanced just a little.
Exactly. But very ambitious for the 70s, which says a lot about the band and what they wanted to do. They had such grand ambitions and ideas. I think it's fantastic. So, again, with technology being so limited in the early days, how did you stay innovative with the tools that you had available back then?
I made a lot of friends in different things, and especially with some of the guys from Lucasfilms, because I lived in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd go up and see what they were working on. I had them actually manufacture most of the materials I used throughout my career.
Okay. And what would you say was the most challenging pyro effect you ever pulled off? Not necessarily just in a KISS show, but any show that you worked on.
The Van Halen signs. They were built for Monsters of Rock. They were 24 feet by 12, made of mirror mylar, and each one of them had over 600 pyrotechnic devices on it. And it would come down from in front of the speakers during the end of the last song and explode and then burn the logo for about 30 seconds. We talk about ambitious. We had stagehands rolling sparklers, 1,200 sparklers a day. We had a whole sparkler roll made up backstage where we had these guys making this effect.
John, that's a perfect segue to my next question. So, can you tell us about some of the other bands or musicians that you work with?
I went from KISS to Rick James. So Gene had prepared me for working for Assholes. So I was kind of, and then Journey, a bunch of Dio, Michael Jackson, Bon Jovi, a bunch of Van Halen. That was my major contract throughout the years. Pink Floyd, Europe, Whitney Houston.
My God, all big names, and the list goes on and on and on. So, and what would you say were those experiences compared to working with KISS, if they can be compared? I don't know. So you can take any topic that you wish, but personalities or dynamics or touring, whatever. So how would you compare those big names compared to KISS?
You go to the top of the chart, which is Van Halen, which was just a pleasure to work for. I mean, they were managed by a man named Ed Leffler, and he took care of the band. He took care of the crew. He was tits on a Ritz.
Mm-hmm.
And you go all the way down to like a tour like Dio, which is not from Dio. Dio was always a gentleman, always a friend and someone that I really loved working for. But he was managed by his wife, which was a nightmare.
Okay.
Now you mentioned that Gene prepared you for working with a-holes. What do you mean by that? Was Gene difficult to work with?
Ask anybody that's ever worked for KISS, and especially back in the makeup days. Gene liked to spit at people, and I hear he still does. He could take a pick. He was the world champion pick flicker. If he wanted to, he could send one to a fan up in the third balcony with flick. But if he was mad at you, he'd give you one right in the head.
Mm-hmm.
It stung. He wouldn't learn most people's names. He would just call them like lights. He was a method actor, so to speak. And when he became the demon, he was a demon. He used to brag about firing one guy on Christmas Eve. Gene is a very complex person. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met, one of the most miserable people I've ever met. It's almost like the whole world is his sociology project. He's just running experiments to see who will take what. The first time I met him during a Dynasty, we had a stage manager that was reading a newspaper in the catering area. And Gene walked up with his crotch almost right at eye level and just stood there staring at him. It's very intimidating, Gene staring. You see the paper start to shake. And finally, there's a headline that says, "Man decapitated in Queens," something like that. And Gene taps the paper and he goes, "Ask me if I did that." Melvin goes, "Did you do that?" And he goes, "Of course not." "How do you know I didn't do it?" "I don't know." And he goes, "Because he still had his balls." And he just walked away.
I could imagine a young Paul and Gene, going from nothing to stardom, and I could imagine what the power must have done to them, and the fandom and the excitement of now being rock stars, legends around the world, and especially Gene being the business professional, how tough he must have been on the crew. So my question is, do you blame him for behaving that way, or it's like, Gene, you could have lightened up?
There's two ways to make a point. I can do it politely, or I can just run over you like a freight train.
Mm-hmm.
Both will get to the same destination, and one's unnecessary. For what it's worth, as much headache and terror as Gene put me through, and I do have PTGSS, post-traumatic symptoms too, from the terrors I still wake up from working with him. But at the end of the day, when you did a good job and Gene was happy, you had something to be proud of.
Yeah. I guess it was not the same with from what you're saying. So you didn't talk much about Paul, but did you have the same kind of interaction with Paul, or you were you were closer to Gene in terms of working, schedule and stuff?
I'm going to give you the inside scoop on working with KISS if you want to survive. The Survivor's Guide to Working with KISS. You're going to have to pick one. You're going to have to pick Gene or Paul.
Ah, okay.
You're going to have to, because if you go down the middle, they will eat you up.
Okay.
But if you pick one and you're in their camp, that one will stand up for you. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So I was definitely in Gene's camp because we were Pyro. And Paul hated Pyro because his voice, if my voice goes, the tour's over. And one time we're in a production meeting and Gene's going, "This with Pyro, and this with Pyro, and this with Pyro." And Paul goes, "Why don't you two just get a room together?" And everybody started laughing. I used to call Gene my Dark Lord. I looked at him and he went, "Go ahead." I went, "Gee, Paul, that is really funny. What is that now? 1 for Paul Stanley and about $1 million for Gene Simmons, but a good one."
So, after having gone through all of that, you're a sucker for punishment. You consulted on the Hot in the Shade and was on the Revenge Tour. Any stories to share from those days?
Well, Gene called me. I pick up the phone and this secretary, this woman goes, "Hold for Gene Simmons." And I'd just gotten married, so I give the phone to my wife real quick. I said, "Whatever you do, just tell him to hold for John Watkins." So he comes on the line, he goes, "Hello?" And she goes, "Hold for John Watkins." I made him wait about a half a minute, and I said, "Yes." So, "Come to me." I'm like, "What?" They were in Texas, and the pyro company they were using was not making them happy. And so they flew me out. I was already scheduled to leave on a Bobby Brown tour. Anyway, to make a short story long, they hired me, and then they were in contract with the other company and got all mixed up with management. And it turned out I didn't do that tour, but I got called for revenge before the tour even began. So,
And what was it like working on Hot in the Shade and Revenge?
Way different. Now, see, Dynasty was my very first tour, so I didn't know any better. Looking back, I could see how much the band hated each other during that time, or certain elements did. On Revenge, they were a nice, tight band, and they all liked each other, and it was actually night and day between the two.
And in terms of the pyro in those days, what were like the rules for safety and creativity for the pyro compared to when you were working in the 70s? Was it a lot more strict working with pyro? Because basically it was the Wild West in the 70s.
It was the Wild West, and Hank Schmel pretty much invented rock and roll pyro. And what he did, to his credit, was he used to call the fire marshals, because there was very few codes or rules or regulations. And he would call them up and invite them down, and he kept a logbook of who came in. But it was that kind of thing that made it into an industry, rather than the guys with the 2x4 and the galvanized pipe full of gunpowder that would kill people. But how do I explain it? It went like that, but because I knew most of the fire marshals in the country, I had a very easy time of it compared to some, because I'd go in and they go, "Oh, it's you." Like, yeah.
We were talking about lasers from the Dynasty show. Hot in the Shade, it was a laser fest. It was, I saw that show as well here in Montreal. It was incredible. And, talking about the lasers coming out of Paul's eyes, it was coming out of Leon's eyes in the Hot in the Shade.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what went into those effects and how were you involved with all of that?
That's a funny story, actually. So I flew in, I think, to Lubbock, and I walk in, and Gene's going, "Thank God you're here." And I looked over, and the pyro guy just happened to be somebody that wanted to work for me before I didn't hire. And I'm going, "Oh my God." It was their setup. It was already a done show. They'd already done rehearsals. They were playing in front of audiences. And so I'm like watching him work. There's a thing called a Lycopodium cannon, which shoots this fine spray of yellow plant spore up in the air. When you light it, it goes off like a grain explosion. And that's what made the big fireball effects for God of Thunder. But if you check your line and you don't unplug the air hose before you check your line, it just blows this yellow powder up in your face, and there's no way to you got yellow face, and you can't get rid of it. It's just, obviously you forgot to unplug the line. So they're going through the first show, and I'm standing behind Gary, watching him work, seeing what's what, and telling him, "I'm not here to take your job. I've got Bobby Brown. I'm just trying to help you." But he wouldn't show me anything, and so he gets to the show, and he's got like 3 different control boards all stacked on top of each other, and none of the lines are marked or labeled. So he's like, looking at this. And he buffs himself with a big face full of lycopodium powder. And so, of course, the effect doesn't go off. So Gene comes over, and he's standing. Here's the stage, and here's the pyro guy. And Gene's just standing over him, looking down. And there's a sold-out amphitheater audience watching this. And Gary doesn't even realize that Gene's standing right there staring at him. But because he's got yellow face and he's sweating, he's a big fatty, he had trickles of yellow down his face. And so I tap him on the back, and he shoos me off. I look up at Gene, and Gene's going, tap him on the back. Looks, he goes, "What?" I go, looks up, and there's Gene. Gene came off that stage with his bass, chased him out of the area. He goes, "You shoot the show." I go, "I have no idea what any of these buttons do. That doesn't sound exactly safe." He goes, "You know how to do it in time. We'll just all go down on the center of the stage, and you just shoot it." And I went, okay, you do that, I'll do it. So they get to be a cue time. I wasn't sure which cue they used, but I could figure out by counting up a song when something would go. And so they'd all go down the middle of the stage. I go, boom! I go, oh, that was cool.
Trying things out.
It's like being during your childhood, getting those firecrackers going, and now you're doing it on stage for real in front of a huge audience.
Even as a child, I used to cut my firecrackers open and make them bigger.
Right.
I made my first flamethrower when I was in 7th grade out of my mother's vacuum cleaner.
Oh my God.
Oh my. John, so we understand that you have a book coming out soon. So we want you to tell us about that. So, but first, what inspired you to finally put your story down on paper?
I have a grandson. I will be long gone before he's old enough to ever hear these stories. You know, maybe you should be 50 before you hear some of them. So I thought if ever he was going to know what I used to do or what I accomplished, I was going to have to tell him, because who else would? So it started out as a record for him to know who Grandpa was, and to set the record straight on some of the lies that were told about Hank after another company took over KISS, and they tried to downplay. They never did one innovative thing that Hank hadn't done. You know, they just copied. It was, and they go, well, he was this and he was fired, and he wasn't fired. He quit. Gene and him ended up falling out. So I wanted to set the record straight that on him, and then I just started pasting him on Facebook, and people really liked him. It really didn't start out to be a big maker book. It just, and it's still not. I'm the world's worst promoter. I ask people, please don't buy this book, because if you're thin-skinned, or if certain words offend you, or sex acts, or I wrote the truth. I wrote the truth as I remember it, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. I think it's hilarious. It's the kind of book that it's the stories that roadies would tell each other over beers in a bar, like, oh yeah, well, you think that this is what happened over here. And so it's not like, oh, weren't they great, or weren't they polished? It's all the mess ups. 50 stories of 57 stories of 50 different celebrities that I worked with that did something goofy. Now, some of them are inspirational, like when I prayed, got on my knees and prayed in the projection booth with Johnny Cash. Or one time I ran into one of my heroes, Andy Kaufman, and we had a private moment in a staircase. But most of them are just things like Garth Brooks running across Van Halen stage where the pyro is, me yelling, said, "Hey, fucker, get off of there." And he goes, "Well, I'm Garth Brooks." I go, "You're on Bob's."
No, I know what you're talking about. You told me one of those stories off camera. I don't want to repeat it here, but it was freaking hilarious.
So, John, your book, from what you said, of course, it's going to cover KISS, but basically it will cover your entire career, right? With all the bands that you've been working on.
No, those books are actually coming up. I've been working on them for probably 4 years now, and it got to be 3,000 something pages, because I covered every tour I ever did. And so what this book is it's almost like a best of, where I went through and picked a funny story from. So it's not like a career book, and it's not that. It's just, I consider it the perfect pooper book. Each story is self-contained, and it takes just about as much time to read as it does to take a good poo. And if you don't like the story, you've got paper right there to wipe with, so you can't lose. Less than 15 cents a page. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll think I lied, but it's true.
Okay.
Now, oftentimes we go through a difficult moment, and we just let it go, we forget it, and we move on with our lives, right? And now you wrote a book, like you said, you want to set the story straight. Was it difficult to relive some of those moments that you felt it's not the way it happened? I want to set the story straight. Maybe you felt some anger as a result of that, or having to relive some of those more difficult moments. What was that like for you?
Well, this is not a revenge book. It's not me getting people. I'm going to tell on you now. But some of it was very hard to write, particularly like when I was on Michael Jackson's Victory Tour, which was the biggest tour in the world. All eyes were on it. And right in the middle of the tour, I had scheduled to get married. So I had to fly home to get married. When I got there, my father, who was everything to me, he wound up having a heart attack and going to the hospital and dying. And so I had to bury him, get married, and do the victory tour all at once. And writing about that brought back how I was almost like a zombie, just going through the motions, just trying to do everything I could.
So without giving too much away from the book, is there a particular story that you really are excited about for the fans to read? Like, oh, I can't wait for the fans to read about this.
Well, if somebody's a fan of the band I'm writing about, they're not going to want to read about it.
Right, right.
But if somebody's a fan of the ridiculous and absurd, they're going to, there's a one where Billy Crystal, the comedian.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In 1979, he was a brand new actor on a sitcom called Family, something like that. Anyway, he was a brand new star, and Entertainment Tonight had sent him to the Los Angeles Forum to interview Gene. And I had to go give Gene his blood to test every night. He had to taste it. So I go walking up, and here's this Billy Crystal with his cameraman waiting. And I just pushed right in front of him because I got things to do. And so he got snippy with me. And I go, he goes, we're here, and I go, I don't give a fuck. I go, look, I got to give Gene this blood to taste. We just killed the kitten minutes ago. I go, you want to taste it? I stuck it right under his nose, and he went, eee! And just when he did that, Gene came out the door, and he goes, with his full makeup on and stuff, very imposing. He goes, John, what did you do? I go, nothing, my dark lord. I just tried to give him your blood to
My
taste.
dark lord.
He goes, he takes it, he swirls it. Right on the ground, right by Billy Crystal's feet. He goes, here, you want some? So that became our code word. Something would happen, we just go,
So, John, whether readers are going to be hardcore KISS fans or Pyro fans or just music lovers, so what do you hope those readers to take away from your book? Just a fun moment to read, just something that you just to
it's
value
all
more?
good fun. This is not the nasty book. This is not the tell the dirty stories. These are stories that, if you have a sense of humor about yourself, they're funny. Everybody's a person, It's not meant to hurt. I just got in a thing with Alex Van Halen where he wrote something in his book that wasn't true, and I made exception to it. But I didn't write about it in my book because it was too dark. It was too ugly. And I'm not trying to get anybody to be mad or hate anybody or hurt anybody. If you can tell me how music fans and KISS fans go in the same sentence, I will answer your question. I actually love a KISS song. And they'll never play it again. I had to fall in love with Christine 16.
Right, right.
And I sent them new lyrics called Christy 60.
Yeah.
Updated.
So I saw you come out of the therapeutic tub with your walker, and I knew.
So, John, I want to know if you could go back in time and give advice to your younger self, just starting out. So young John starting out with Pyro stuff. What would you tell that little guy there?
To go with Bill Graham's offer. I worked for Bill Graham, the promoter, before I got KISS, and so I started out as a security guard watching the doors, and made my way up to a stagehand, and used that as a jumping board over to KISS. But I used to do comedy shows for Bill.
Okay,
it's funny, and I'm doing my very last show. It was a Day on the Green, which was the Oakland Stadium, football stadium, and my name was a trivia question up on the big scoreboard. And all of a sudden, Bill goes, "You're leaving?" I went, "Yeah, I'm gonna go on the KISS tour." And he was mad. I go, "What's wrong?" And one of his top people said, Bill's opened a comedy club and he was going to make you the MC. He opened the Punchline. I had no idea.
Wow.
I could have had a comedy career.
So,
Oh, wow.
And I went, no, I promised KISS. And I was filling my friend's place that died. You know, I felt a moral obligation to carry on for him. And so when I left for KISS, I did not know one single person there. Hank Schmel to me was just someone that my friend Tim had told me about when he was off tour, about how frightening he was. I'd never been on the other side of the Mississippi River. So I packed up all my little stuff and got on that airplane and went and did it.
Could you have liked to, because of what you just said, could you have liked to kind of pursue a comedian career instead of doing what you did?
That you said was my one regret. That's the one I sit there. I wonder what would have happened if.
Okay, what if?
Yeah, yeah.
It's one of those what ifs. Okay.
So John, a couple more questions before we let you go. And it's interesting. You mentioned that particular regret because you mentioned how you wrote your book for your grandkids to know your legacy, your accomplishments, and the stories behind which you did. But what does it mean to you to have been a part of so many unforgettable moments in rock history? You are a part of rock history. What does that mean to you?
Everybody knew that but me. I became a single father, and which is why I left touring, which I absolutely loved. If anybody was doing the job they were meant to do, I was it. I mean, I was doing my hobby. I was collaborate with the biggest acts in the world, and then you leave that, and what are you qualified to do? And you got to make a living. So you go from that to minimum wage jobs, and I kind of like disappeared for a long time. And this a guy named John JT Thomas, who was KISS's pyrotechnician, looked me up, and it was his looking me up that made me realize that people still knew who I was.
Mm-hmm.
But
even now with the release of your book, more and more people are realizing who you are, and you're coming on a lot of podcasts as well. So do you feel that more fans are coming up to you and saying, yes, I know who you are, and I love hearing your stories. I saw you on this podcast, on this show. Are you getting more and more of that now?
I wish. And like, fuck you. Who do you think you are? You just said that about Steve Taylor. He's a god.
Right. So speaking of which, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would you want your legacy to be?
Good grandpa.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Good answer. Good answer.
Nice. Love it. Super nice. Well, John, it's been I have to say, it's been a true pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time, for sharing all those stories and, some personal stuff too, which is not always easy. So many thanks. And I hope, everybody there on the other side enjoyed all the stories related to KISS and some of the big acts. So a true pleasure. So thank you so much, my friend. Thank you.
And my beloved Victoria gave me my Van Halen tie, so
I love it. Yeah,
I wouldn't get out of her like, "Hi, Vicky."
What I want our listeners to get out of the show is that, John, you lived the dream, working with so many rock stars and musicians, and the stuff that you've done, the stories that you have to share are just incredible. But the one thing for you that matters the most, your grandpa, and the hat.
Remember that from
Absolutely.
On this wall back here is KISS 1977 backstage pass.
Oh wow. Looks like you have a bulletin board. It's all passes from different bands and shows, and
yep.
Very nice. Very nice. See, right there, that's part of your legacy, But again, like you said, your legacy are your grandkids. It's you're a grandfather, and I think that's a beautiful message to end the show.
Yeah, well, and the biggest thing that I think I do is I work for fire safety now after that horrible tragedy in Rhode Island that killed 100 people at the Station nightclub. And I actually used to do pyro for Great White. Not that night, but I consult with the attorney that represented most of the victims and participated in the documentary and support their cause, the survivors of that, any way and every way I can. So,
oh, that's fantastic. That's right. You're a class act, my friend. Class act. Fantastic. Thank you. So once again, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure, and I think our listeners are going to get a real kick out of this. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. To the KISS Army, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, please send them to talktome@kissarmynationpodcast.com. Until the next time, remember, never stop rocking. Take care, everyone.